Hello and welcome to this recorded webinar about Profile Match 2. Over the course of this video, I'm going to give you an overview of Profile Match from what's going on sort of behind the scenes through to the various report outputs that we have available as well. So just sort of to briefly introduce myself, my name is Elliot Phillips and I am a senior consultant psychologist here at PCL. I am personally a big fan of Profile Match 2 and I'm really excited to get to sort of speak to you about the system and the reports over the course of this video. If you would like a copy of the slides sort of from this video, please scan that QR code that's on the screen, or equally click on the link in the description below and it'll take you through to a PDF version of the slides. As an overview then, as I've just mentioned, I want to explore firstly what underpins Profile Match. So we're going to start off with what is personality and how do we assess personality sort of in a psychometrically robust way. And then I'll also explain how we map that across to competencies and competency fit. If you're familiar with Profile Match, you'll understand that a lot of the interface in terms of the system itself and the reports that you get will talk about competency fit, even though it's actually underpinned by personality assessment. So I'll explain a little bit around how that process works. I'll then walk you through the various report outputs from Profile Match, showing you sort of where the value really sits with each and how we would advise you use each of the reports. But equally, if you have any questions about any of this, having watched the video, please do get in touch and our contact details will be at the very end of the video. So, why personality? Personality introduces a behavioural bias, and although all of us have free will and can decide on a course of action in any given moment, there will be a persistent tendency to revert back to our basic dispositions. By analogy, a boat, for example, can move around on the surface of the water, but it will always centre around an anchor point that may be on the ocean bed. Similarly, our behaviours from moment to moment will vary and we can try and flex how, say, talkative we might be, given on the context that we're in, but that will be influenced by our personality underneath, in the same way that the position of the boat will be limited depending upon where that anchor is sat. For any individual, personality has an impact on job success. People will hire us or fire us, they will collaborate with us or keep us at a distance based on our personality traits and their behavioural manifestation. That's what makes it a crucial predictor of job success, and this is something that has also been found in the world of sort of psychological research, and I'm going to touch on some of that in just a moment as well. Within sort of the world of sort of personality models, how do we approach it, understand it, conceptualize, and most important, how do we measure it? The two main sort of approaches to these models are called type and trait models. Now, type models allocate people into categories. For example, are you introverted or extroverted? This is sort of similar to asking somebody if a colour is light or dark. It's quite crude, but that can give you more of an understanding than having no description at all. The issue with this approach to assessment is that it reduces our intricate individual differences down to a restricted number of categories. The assessments that are based on type models also have poorer reliability and should not be used for selection, only as a source sort of to start conversation in a development setting or in a team setting, for example. By contrast, though, trait-based models can be used across the board, from team settings and professional development, but also through into selection, onboarding, talent pipelining, and more. Trait models of personality allocate people to a position along a sliding scale. So, for example, what is your level of extroversion, rather than are you extroverted or introverted? So, this is analogous to determining how light or dark a colour is along a sliding scale as well. It gives you a far more representative view of somebody, or of defining, in this case, a shade of green, rather than just having light dark. It's far more granular in terms of what you're able to assess and pick up on. The most successful trait-based model is arguably the 5-factor model of personality. This has withstood a huge amount of scrutiny from academics and is considered to be sort of the gold standard among personality models. This model represents individuals' personalities across 5 domains. Now, we refer to these 5 factors or domains as the primary colours of personality. That's kind of the best way to conceptualize this. Assessments that measure the 5-factor model provide the framework for measuring an individual's underlying temperament, the stable dispositions that account for the consistencies in their behaviour. These are the characteristics that differentiate one person from another and determine how an individual is likely to behave on a day-to-day basis over time. What are those consistent tendencies that tend to come through? Profile Match 2 specifically then is in fact rooted in the 5-factor model of personality, and the questionnaire that drives Profile Match is a 5-factor model measure. Now, it's really important just sort of to note here, there are no good or bad personality profiles. They all work to the benefit of performance in some roles and to its detriment in others. Interpretation of any personality assessment is very context dependent. For example, high agreeableness scores may have a positive impact in a customer service role, but may have more of a negative influence when implementing unpopular decisions or dealing with disciplinary issues. I'm going to come back to the importance of context in a moment, but first I want to address the question of why should you trust the Profile Match 2 assessment, even if personality is worth paying attention to. Why Profile Match 2 in particular? The 10 bubbles on screen you can see, by the way, are the 10 scales that make up the Profile Match assessment, and you can see there are 2 scales per factor of personality. That assessment is highly reliable. Now, what it means for an assessment to be reliable is that it will give you consistent results. There are a few ways in which we can test that statistically, and if you'd like to read up on sort of the tests that you can run for reliability and the kind of performance that Profile Match 2 has, you can find all of that in the technical manual, which is available on the Profile Match website. The link for the Profile Match website, by the way, is in the description, and I'll be giving you a QR code later on as well that will take you straight there. So if you want to find out sort of some of the nitty-gritty behind reliability for Profile Match, please do read the technical manual. But broadly, what this means is that when you've taken the assessment, it's robust psychometrically, it's well built, and in the same way that on screen we have the analogy here of someone throwing darts, they've been consistent in being able to hit the bullseye when they've thrown their 3 darts. If they also came back next week and they could continue to hit the bullseye, you'd have a lot of confidence in that particular person's ability to throw darts and to hit a bullseye. Similarly, when a psychometric assessment has high reliability to it, we can have confidence that it will reliably be measuring the same thing each time that we use it. And that's been something that we found that Profile Match can do, and isn't something that we're just going to say about Profile Match. It's even been reviewed by the BPS as well. So if any of you are psychologists who want to go and read the British Psychological Society test review, you can find a test review for Profile Match on the BPS website as well. In addition, though, to being highly reliable, it also predicts performance. So I said earlier on that personality has been found in academia and psychological research to have impact on workplace performance. Not only is that true for personality broadly, but here at PCL we've carried out research with Profile Match and found that Profile Match has a direct impact on being able to predict performance within certain roles. And again, if you would like to find out a little bit more about what those kind of research studies look like, on the Profile Match website you'll see a tab at the very top that's called Research Report, and you can find plenty of detail in there. Now, I mentioned earlier on the importance of context. In addition to just having something be context relevant, for example, agreeableness being really so desirable in a customer support role, the way in which components of personality interact and influence one another creates an abundance of diversity, which we then see in human behavior. So it emphasizes that in a particular context, one aspect of personality may be more influential than another, and there may be a certain desirable level within any of those scales in one context, but not in another. But the process of starting to mix scales together, to bring them together in terms of creating more of a holistic understanding of how somebody is likely to perform in a given role, is equivalent to moving away from the primary colours of personality to an array of possible colours on your palette. That process of mixing colours in meaningful ways creates something more interesting and more insightful than the primary colours alone can do. So we do the same thing with those 10 personality scales. The choice of which personality scales to mix and how to mix them is determined by research and by decades of acquired experience by PCL psychologists. So, for example, communication skills is one of the competencies in the profile match system. Here you have a brief description of what communication skills is all about, what we're trying to capture with that competency. And I'm just going to throw back up here that 5-factor model with the 10 profile match scales around it. Now, if you're not familiar with profile match or with personality, I'm very appreciative that you may not have much of a sense of what each of these scales is looking at. But if you would like to just take a moment here to think about what components of personality may be relevant for communication skills, go ahead and pause the video, and in just a moment I'm going to walk you through it. So, communication skills actually draws from these 4 personality scales. There's sociability, self-esteem, sensitivity, and accommodation. So what's really interesting with these, by the way, is it doesn't mean that more of each of these components is better. So it's not that somebody with really high sociability, really high self-esteem, and so on is going to be somebody who is fantastic at communication skills. In fact, again, rooted into the competency metrics here, is sort of a Goldilocks zone. And this makes sense, again, if we think about this for just sociability at the moment. If somebody is super high on sociability, they're going to be incredibly chatty, but probably not give people the opportunity to also have equal contribution into a conversation, because they'll be too busy talking, and not necessarily listening to what's coming in from the other side of a conversation. Whereas if they're too low on sociability, they may not be talking enough to be effective in delivering the message they need to deliver. So when it comes to communication skills, there's a Goldilocks zone somewhere in the middle for sociability, and that's true for each of these 4 personality scales that contributes to communication skills. And the cutoffs of sort of where that ideal zone sits, as I said before, is underpinned by psychological science and research. All of this, though, is behind the scenes. And as a Profile Match 2 user, you don't need to know all of that. I think it's helpful to have a sense of, especially if clients ask you questions for what is Profile Match, how does it work? But all you need to do when using Profile Match is to select the competencies that you want to include for any given project. There are 27 competencies available in our bank on Profile Match, and you need to decide which you choose up to 10. We typically recommend that sort of somewhere around 6 or 8 is usually ideal for a given project. It allows you to hone in on the competencies that are really crucial for performance in a role without adding any in that becomes slightly redundant. But as I say, you can have up to 10 in any given project. In terms of how you choose and how you sort of whittle down the 27 to your select few, you can do this by reading the competency descriptions and identifying which are most crucial for your current project. This document, by the way, is available on the Profile Match website in the top banner called Competency Library. Another method by which you can approach how to choose the competencies for a role is to use the job analysis survey. Now, in this webinar, I'm actually not going to go into too much detail on the job analysis survey, but just to give you a quick introduction to it, it is a free tool within the Profile Match system that allows you to send a short survey out to some key stakeholders. For example, the manager for a particular role, perhaps some of the role incumbents, and maybe even some of their direct reports, for example. When they complete this short survey, the report that you then generate that you can see on screen now will show you in rank order which of the competencies are most likely to be crucial for performance based on those stakeholders' responses. If you'd like to get in touch to talk about the job analysis survey, if you have any particular questions, please do reach out. And again, our contact details will be at the end of this video. But this process of choosing the competencies that are most relevant for your given project, if I can return here to the colours analogy and really exhaust it, this is the stage where you take the available colours and combine them into a template that is bespoke to your project. It's analogous to moving from palette to painting. So the competency metrics took those primary colours and turned them into 27 colours, 27 competencies on your palette that are available to you. And now your choice when it comes to creating your project or creating your painting, by analogy, is to pick up on the right one. So for example, for this painting we have on screen, there's no purple, but there's lots of blue and yellow and green. So those will be colours you'll be bringing in for this particular project. Just to give you a sense here of how bespoke you can be in creating a template, there are over 3 trillion possible competency combinations. So there are more possible profile match templates than there are people on the planet. And again, that's really a bit of a fun fact, but it gives you an idea of the breadth and the scope that Profile Match is able to accommodate when you are setting up projects for whatever it might be you're using Profile Match for, be it selection or development. But it can really allow you to get into the idiosyncrasies of what's crucial for a given role. Once you have chosen your selection of competencies, either via the job analysis survey or by choosing them directly yourself, your candidates will then take the Profile Match 2 personality questionnaire that I mentioned earlier on, that sort of produces scores on those 10 scales. It's worth noting here that they will take the same assessment regardless of your competency selection. So it's a very consistent candidate experience regardless of the competencies you've chosen, so from one project to the next. As I say, very consistent candidate experience. The assessment typically takes 10 to 20 minutes to complete, but it is not a timed assessment, so your candidates can take as long as they would like to complete the Profile Match assessment. What comes out of the other end is then a competency-based report which presents your candidates' personality profiles through the lens of competency metrics. I'm just going to walk you through quickly some of the reports that are available for a selection context, and then I'll show you each of those reports in turn and give you a little bit more information about them. So we have the sifting report, typically used for more of a volume space of just getting a really high level overview of your candidates. Selection reports that give you a more of an in-depth view of each of your candidates applying for a role. The interview guide, which is designed, unsurprisingly, to assist you with interview. And then there's also a feedback report, which is more focused on improving candidate experience throughout your selection process. There's one final report I just want to quickly mention while we're here, and that's the personal development report, which is then used for individuals' progression and development within an organization. So I'll walk you through each of these in turn in just a moment, but this is really an overview of what are the steps when you're using Profile Match. On the left-hand side, it's choose your competencies. Then you send out the assessment to your candidates, and reports are automatically generated and sent to usually the admin email that you set up when creating the project template. And there's also an option for some of these reports to automatically send them to the individual who's taken the assessment as well. And again, if you have any particular questions around how each of those would work and how you can set up those steps, please get in touch. So, starting us off then is the sifting report. What you've got on screen here is a screen grab of a sample sifting report. The sifting report is designed to give you an overview of candidates fit for a particular role against the competencies that you've chosen. So the one that we have on screen has chosen 10 competencies. And really this report is a basis for candidate comparison. You can have multiple candidate reports up against next to each other, and you can start to see where certain levels of competency fit lie for one candidate versus another. It's really designed to inform the selection process, and of all of the profile match reports, it's the most light touch. So clients of ours who tend to use a sifting report will often use it in a volume space, or when they're trying to sift through a large pool of applicants for a given role. If you want to get more detail and more information on particular candidates, perhaps at the next stage in a selection process, then we recommend using the selection report. This has a full interpretation of each competency. So the first page in this report is exactly the same as the sifting. It gives you that overview with those bars on a bar chart. But then you'll get one page per competency that starts to give you an in-depth view of how your candidate's personality will influence their capability to deliver against these particular competencies. And what's worth mentioning here is that the selection report really starts to highlight granularity and allows you to distinguish differences between your applicants. So, for example, Sophie on screen here has a 5 out of 10 in terms of her fit score for this particular competency. Let's say, for example, I also have a 5 out of 10 fit score for this competency. Sophie could well be there because for each of the personality contributing components, she's got moderate fit for all three. I happen to know there are 3 components that feed into creativity. And let's say for myself though, I've got one that's moderate, but one that's actually a really strong fit, and then one that's actually a really weak fit. As a result, I'd also end up at a match of 5, for example. What the report text will show for Sophie and myself, though, is the difference that we both have. So when it describes the components of Sophie's personality that have driven her 5 out of 10 score on creativity, it will explain her degree of moderate fit for each. Whereas mine would then describe a component of moderate fit, a component of strong fit, and a component of low or poor fit for that particular competency. So this is really where you start to pick up on those idiosyncrasies between your various candidates. If you want to use Profile Match to assist you with interview, there's then the interview guide. As I say, this is really focusing on helping people sort of use an evidence-based approach to an interview process. And what you can see on screen here with this sample report is rather than paragraphs of personality text to explain why somebody sits at a particular competency fit level, you get suggested interview questions, and these will differ per candidate, again, depending upon the personality scale scores that are driving the competency fit. So whereas Sophie and I both had a 5 out of 10 fit on creativity for different reasons, if you had our interview guides for creativity as well, you would also see different interview questions because the way in which we are both a 5 out of 10 for creativity is different. And so you want to also accommodate that difference in the way in which you ask them questions during the selection process. Just to give you a real example of this, I have Sophie's profile on the left and another sample profile of ours called Lee on the right-hand side. For strategic awareness, these individuals are not identical, but pretty similar in their overall fit. Sophie's got a 7 and Lee has got a 6 for strategic awareness. But if you start to look at some of these paragraphs of text, if we look at ambitious, for example, You can start to see, as I've highlighted there, very different text for these two individuals. So despite having similar competency fit, the reasons for those levels of fit differ between these two. And this is where the text you're seeing on screen from the selection reports allows you to really start to tease apart those differences between each of them. Similarly, if we look at the interview guide for Sophie and for Lee, what you'll also see here are different interview questions. So again, reflecting the difference in personality scores, but still relating to strategic awareness, how would you probe into some of these areas with Sophie, and how would you probe into some of them with Lee? Hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea, a bit of a feel for how the report text in Profile Match adapts to the profile scores of each of your candidates. The last report I want to walk you through then, from the selection side of Profile Match, is the feedback report. Now, this is the report that's really designed for candidates as opposed to sort of the hiring panel, for example. So this report is designed, as the first sort of bullet point alludes to here, to improve candidate experience. Ultimately, it's a report that you can give to candidates that provides them with an understanding of the data that they've provided by completing the Profile Match assessment, but it doesn't expose competency fit and sort of preserves the integrity of what you may be probing into, for example, once you get to interview. So the feedback report provides, as you can see on screen here, an overview of their personality profile from this bar chart perspective. And then there's about 1.5 pages that has very brief descriptive text. There's a very small paragraph for each of those 10 personality scales of perhaps 2 or 3 sentences each. So again, it's providing candidates with an understanding of the assessment and perhaps what it's reflected about them, but it doesn't show them how that then translates across to what you may be exploring when they come in for an assessment center exercise or for interviews, for example. And the last report that I want to walk you through sits in the development side of Profile Match, and it's the Personal Development Report. This is the most in-depth report that the system has, and it is quite exhaustive, and it's really broken into 2 main parts. Part 1 walks an individual through their personality profile, so all 10 scales from the Profile Match personality assessment. This is why we describe it as providing a panoramic view of an individual, because before we get into what's crucial for your role, it's let's have a look at the entirety of your personality profile. On screen, you'll see a page that I've taken out of Sophie Sample's report for sociability. So it's got a definition of what sociability is, provides her scale score, and then goes into having 3 fairly large paragraphs around interpreting what it will mean for Sophie to have a scale score in that particular range. Underneath, there are then some points for reflection. So there's an encouragement here for an individual reading their personal development report to pick it up, read through and understand the text, and then start to actively reflect and engage in, actually, how do these behaviours show up for me? When they do appear within my role, when are they working to my advantage? When are they perhaps holding me back? And to really actively reflect on the text that they've got in their reports. Part 2 of the personal development report is then all around competency fit. So while part 1 is quite panoramic, part 2 is then very focused. It says, okay, we've been over your personality profile, but now we're going to look at sort of the most relevant components as they relate to the competencies that are critical for high performance in your role. So as a whole, the personal development report is very detailed and very exhaustive. It goes through a lot for an individual to try and digest. Our sort of general guidance and advice is that whether you're going through your own personal development report or if you're feeding it back to somebody else, you have 2 sessions. One is to reflect on that personality profile, sort of let that sink in and sort of really think about it for a while, and then come back perhaps a week or so later for another sort of self-development or reflection session, and to then go through your competency fit part of the report. Now, as I've just alluded to, the reports are designed with the text to be used by the individual who took the assessment. It can be sort of driven in terms of, I'll read my report and I'll start to identify where my strengths and shortcomings are and what can I do as a consequence of that. However, we also wanted to provide our profile match users with a resource that will help them feed back to somebody else on their profile match results. That then brings me on to the Development Feedback Facilitator Guide. This is a resource that's available on the Profile Match 2 website under the My Resources section. What we've put together here is just some guidance and tips on how you can prepare for a feedback session. So if you want to have somebody's report delivered to them rather than just sent straight away, and just walk them through their results to help them understand what that means and to explore the results as part of a discussion rather than just isolated reflection, this guide will help you do that as well as possible. So, having given you, admittedly, quite a brief and fast overview of the underpinnings for Profile Match, sort of what goes on behind the curtain or under the bonnet, as well as then what you get as an output, what you can use when you've employed Profile Match, both within selection and in development contexts. You can go ahead and get started with Profile Match 2 today. All you need to do is to create an account, and then once you've created an account, you'll just buy some credits, set up a project, send candidates a link to take the assessment, and as soon as they complete, you'll receive their reports. In order to access the Profile Match system and to create an account, just scan that QR code on screen, or again, follow the link that we'll provide for you in the description of this video. Setting up an account is free, so if you want to just access Profile Match and kind of see what the capabilities could be within the system, perhaps you want to read some of those technical manuals or to access that feedback guide that we've created as well, please feel free. And if you have any questions at any point, also, please do reach out. We're always happy to help.